I would like to start the introduction of our panelists with our online presenter participants. Marilia Maciel is based in Rio. I guess, Marilia, you have nicer weather in Rio than we have today in Geneva, although it's getting a bit better. Marilia is the researcher and coordinator of the Center for Technology at Getulio Vargas Foundation in Brazil, one of the leading think tanks in Brazil. She is a researcher in the field of ICT, internet governance, and digital policy. Welcome, Marilia. Here in the room we have, and I'll start from the right-hand side, is Maciel Hausding from Switch. He works at Switch. He's a cyber and internet security expert. He basically works at the Swiss.ch at Liechtenstein CCTLD, and his research is on questions on the safer internet. What we'll try to ask Maciel to focus on the question of the user's perspective. Next to Maciel is the Phil Zimmerman. There is no need to introduce Phil, but it is, as one friend of mine told me, it's always nice, although there is no need. Phil is the creator of the pretty good privacy, one of the leading standard in the field of the open encryption, and with quite a few interesting positions in academic and business sector. And the latest is related to Geneva and the Silent Circle company, which is trying to provide encrypted solution for the wider community through the open source solution. Welcome, Phil. Richard Hill, also there is no need to introduce Richard. Richard is a good friend of Geneva Internet Platform and frequent participants in our panel discussion. He has his background in the statistics and information technology. He was the official of the ITU, and his career is, Richard, your career is quite multi-stakeholder, from business sector, international organizations, and lately with the civil society. He is the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Internet Society Switzerland. It sounds pompous. He is in charge of international cooperation at the Internet Society Switzerland. We have an excellent panelist who will cover this question of encryption, security, and data protection from various perspectives. One issue, the frame that I suggest for our discussion, is inspired by latest Socratic dialogue that we at Diplo created in order to initiate discussion on internet on the encryption, security, and privacy protection. We basically realized that the issues are rarely black and white or ones and zeros. The issues are rarely digital. They're very often analog when it comes to these issues. And all key players in this debate have the legitimate concerns and legitimate interest to be protected. When I'm indicating key players, it means us users and civil society. It means governments who are in charge of security, and it means also business sector, which has a security as an important aspect of their business model. Therefore, that is the spirit. I would like also to announce that we are preparing a theater play. The script for theater play will be open source drafting. We will introduce it in 10 days with 3 characters: privatus, protecting privacy interest; securitus, protecting security interest; and now Teresa will help me. Commercius is protecting business interest. Therefore, that will be fun, but also it reflects how complex this discussion is and how essential it is for the future of humanity and the future development of our society. Without further ado, I would like to invite Phil Zimmerman, Phil, to give us a few introductory remarks on this interplay between privacy, security, data protection. As we agreed, we'll organize session as a jam session with a few introductory remarks, and later on discussion with audience online and in situ. Phil, floor is yours.
How long is my time interval?
10-ish,
Okay.
9 minutes, 45 seconds. No.
Okay. Well, too often I hear that there's a sort of either or choice that we have to make between privacy and security. And I'd like to, I'm not the first one to make this point, that really it's a false dichotomy, because when you say security, you have to take into account what is your threat model. And if your threat model includes criminals or foreign intelligence agencies breaking into your networks, then if you want security from that kind of attack, you need to have privacy-enabling technologies. You need to have strong crypto. You need to have other kinds of things, intrusion detection, firewalls, kernels that are well implemented that prevent privilege escalation, good sandboxing. You need to have all the things that will prevent outside attacks. Now, for a long time, there's been, for centuries really, there's been an arms race. I'm best known for my work in cryptography, but I'd like to expand that to other aspects of cybersecurity here for this discussion. There's been an arms race going on for centuries between cryptographers and cryptanalysts. And until about 50 years ago, these two sides would, at various times, one would get ahead of the other, and then the other one would catch up and pass. During World War II, the cryptanalysts had an advantage over the cryptographers, and that made it possible for the Allies to win the war. But starting in the 1970s, cryptography started getting better and better to the point where it could outrun the cryptanalysts. And so since the late 70s, we've really been pretty far ahead on the cryptography side. So the very best cryptanalytic techniques are unable to break the very best cryptographic techniques. I say the very best in both cases because there's a lot of bad cryptography. But we're not considering the bad cryptography, we're considering the best cryptography and the best cryptanalytic techniques. But this advantage that we've had in cryptography has not been the same on the other side of cybersecurity, which is how to protect computers from being broken into. In that case, it is the attackers that have the upper hand. And they have very strongly the upper hand. Cryptographers really sometimes labor under the illusion that they can put their opponents in a position where they have to solve a hard math problem to win. And if they can put their opponents in the position of having to solve a hard math problem, then they've won. And that's the kind of position that cryptographers, or at least inexperienced cryptographers, tend to think. They become very self-satisfied with the idea that they've created a system which requires their opponents to solve a hard math problem to break. But in fact, if your opponents can break into the computer that you're running the crypto on, and they can get control of that computer and get privilege escalation and get super user capabilities, it doesn't matter how good the crypto is. And in fact, if you look at all the Snowden documents, what's very clear is that the intel agencies are able to break into the computers, and they're not using cryptanalysis, they're using just breaking in with zero-day attacks and getting control, getting privilege escalation, and compromising the platform. And then when they do that, they can then exfiltrate cryptographic keys. They can do key logging for passphrases. They can compromise entropy sources for key generation. They can do all kinds of things. So, in fact, they could even just take control of the entire platform and take control of the camera and the microphone and turn on the camera and microphone in your office and just observe everyone's voice conversations as they stand near their computer. This happened to the Dalai Lama when the Chinese tricked the Dalai Lama's office into opening a PDF email attachment. So if we have to find ways to improve the security there. We have to be using the best cryptography. We have to be using better and better protections on the operating system. And if we hear law enforcement complaining that because of strong crypto, that the internet is going dark. Well, that's just nonsense, because if you look at the overall picture of surveillance today and compare it to what it was 20 years ago, they have a comprehensive picture and a fusion of surveillance information from various sources. You have optical character recognition of traffic cameras, looking at cars' license plates as they go by, and then you can track the movements of vehicles. You have face recognition algorithms that are getting better and better with three-dimensional contour mapping of faces and biometric recognition of human beings. And all these things, with millions and millions of surveillance cameras, and then the acquisition of transaction data, travel data, where you ate a ham sandwich when you met somebody for lunch, and the tracking of your phone's location. I mean, there is an embarrassment of riches in surveillance that is brought together into a kind of fusion of total information awareness. This is what all the major governments are doing. The United States, China, Russia, the intel agencies are producing a kind of super fusion of very high situational awareness. And so to complain about, oh, it's a terrible thing that there's a little bit of encryption somewhere that we can't break, and to cry about, that, oh, it's going dark. Well, no, it's not. It's that they have this vast picture of clear awareness of what's going on, and there's a couple of black pixels that are still black pixels because of strong crypto. Well, would they be willing to trade the position of 20 years ago, their former selves, when there was very little of this picture that was visible? There were just a few patches that were visible. No, they are enjoying a golden age of surveillance with a few missing pixels on their 65-inch Sony 4,000 pixel wide HD TV. There's a couple of bad pixels. So we have to have strong crypto. We have to have improved security in preventing attacks on our networks, and and sovereign states, criminal organizations are breaking in. If you put a backdoor in for law enforcement, you're putting a backdoor in for bad guys. You remember a few years ago there was a confrontation between Google and the Chinese government. The reason why that confrontation occurred is because Google had put in a backdoor for law enforcement in their servers. And the Chinese government hijacked that backdoor and used it to spy on Chinese dissidents. And that's what was the source of that confrontation between Google and China. You can't build a backdoor for the good guys without having a backdoor available to the bad guys. So anyway, I'm not sure what you guys wanted to hear about, but that's my...
Well, exactly what you said.
Yeah.
we just heard an excellent framing for our discussion, that you basically indicated that security concerns are legitimate.
It's a false dichotomy. You don't have privacy or security. If you want security, you need to have privacy.
And what is one, I'm sure somebody will tweet it, golden age of surveillance. That's a lovely tweet, and quite a few issues that I'm sure will raise the interesting questions and points. But this was exactly what was extremely helpful for framing our discussion. We'll see if Marilia is online, and if while we're waiting for Marilia to connect from Rio, I would like to invite Maciel to give us a few reflections along these lines. Oh, Marilia, okay, could you have Marilia? Hello, Marilia.
Hello, Jovan.
Okay, Marilia, it's great to have you. We don't see any sun. You seems to be in the room. We just started with introductory remarks by Mr. Phil Zimmerman, and who basically argued that it's not a digital issue, it is analog issue. It's not black and white, it's not privacy versus security. it is more, let's say, analog, and there are different players. What is your view from your long research on the question of the internet governance, privacy, and some reflections from, let's say, situation discussion in Brazil, in Latin America? Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. I trust that you can hear me well. It's a pleasure to connect with you. Unfortunately, I am in the office. It is a beautiful sunny day, but I'm happy to be with you. I think that I agree very much with what Phil has said before, and I think that we need to bear in mind that the way that the internet and the architecture of the internet functions, all the connection that we make to the internet is intermediated by a series of actors that many times are not visible to us. So every data package that we send from sender to receiver is intermediated by actors. And the importance of these actors in the chain is paramount. And not only encryption is an issue that we need to discuss, but also the terms of service that we agree to when we enter into relationship with these intermediaries, with these platforms. So pretty much sending a non-encrypted message through the internet can be compared to sending a postcard in the offline world. You cannot reasonably expect that your postcard will not be read by the man at the post office, by the mailman. So you cannot reasonably expect privacy if you're sending a postcard. It's very likely that the message will be read. And it's the same with a non-encrypted message in the online world. This message will be intermediated by your internet service provider, by infrastructure providers such as cable companies, satellite companies, your email provider, and etc. And of course, it can be intercepted by criminals, by people that are connected to the internet as well, with bad intentions. So sending an unencrypted message makes the user of the internet very vulnerable. So strong encryption and the protection of devices is becoming more and more widespread, not only for privacy reasons, but also for security reasons, as Phil mentioned before, because it makes it harder for these actors to intercept the content of messages. But not only that, I think that lately, because people are so much more aware of threats to their privacy, companies as well have started to offer more and more services such as end-to-end encryption as a competitive advantage in the market in order to build or regain trust with a consumer that is very not trusting the internet right now in a scenario of widespread surveillance. But it's also important that this information is encrypted, not only when it is transmitted, but also the information, the data that is at rest somewhere. So the encryption of transmission is important because of all these intermediaries that we spoke about. But the encryption of data at rest is important for a phenomenon of datafication that is increasing, and also the growing incentives that actors have today to retain information, be it for commercial incentives, for instance, with big data analytics and all the potential of revenue that this can generate, but also legal incentives. Governments more and more are creating laws that make actors be obliged to retain information. And we saw this in Brazil with Marco Civil, for instance. Marco Civil has a provision that obliges intermediaries to retain data for 6 months or 1 year. And this is very important because it increases information at rest. But encryption brings not only benefits, but also challenges. And the first of them is challenges to business operation. And this is very important. Surveys that have been conducted with business companies have pointed out that the #1 challenge for business companies today is not that their information is being necessarily breached, but their main challenge is to manage information, where this information is located, coordinating between their data management technologies. So we are still struggling with information management many times. And encryption could add an additional layer of complexity to information management. So it's not clear in which phase encryption will happen in business sectors. Depending on the business sectors, it could add to complexity. And this is a challenge that we have in terms of fostering widespread encryption. Another challenge is related to law enforcement, and this was mentioned by Phil. With the advance of technology, encryption is used by many that want to protect their security and privacy, but it's also used by malicious actors. And as a result, The law enforcement community has tried to approve laws that would grant them some sort of special access or backdoors to encrypted devices or to encrypted services. And we are believing this in Brazil very much. There is a cybercrime committee in the Brazilian Congress right now that is trying to introduce backdoors to encrypted devices. We saw a legal decision requesting information from WhatsApp just before a strong encryption was included in WhatsApp. So this is a legal battle between platforms and the legal law enforcement actors that is still taking place. But however, as we saw in the recent Apple case, backdoors do not seem to be the solution for the problem, because first of all, we cannot guarantee that this information will be used only for law enforcement purposes. It may be as well used for other purposes, such as surveillance. And we cannot guarantee that these backdoors of these technologies will be only in the hands of law enforcement agencies. They may become widespread, and then citizens will be even more fragile to criminals online. And of course, these decisions, they in a globalized world in which the markets are globalized, they have extraterritorial effects. Apple sells their products worldwide. So if they comply with an order coming from US authorities, that could mean putting citizens worldwide of other jurisdictions under potential surveillance of the US government or under threat to criminals on the internet. And law enforcement uses this strong expression that Phil mentioned before. They say that they are going dark, but however, the cases, especially the criminal cases, they are built around several elements, not only the content of messages. And these elements to convict someone, they can be obtained from a plurality of sources. They can be obtained by other parties involved in the crime. They can be obtained from metadata. And it's very important to realize that metadata still gives a lot of information in terms of patterns of relationship between actors, and metadata is still available. And it can be obtained in a scenario of widespread use and introduction of Internet of Things. And from these many data points that now law enforcement agents will have access to in a scenario of Internet of Things. So I think it is not fair, like you said, to say that the law enforcement is going dark in any way. I do agree that we live in a scenario of a golden age of surveillance, of widespread surveillance. And last, just to finish my point, I think that it is not clear yet that we will see this widespread introduction of encryption technologies. I think that some major companies introduced encryption, Apple, WhatsApp, but implemented end-to-end encryption in some business models. It may go against the way that these companies make their revenues. Just think about information, for instance, that is acquired to provide advertisement, information that is acquired to target consumers online. For these companies, it may not be interesting to introduce encryption. So what we'll see in the future, I think, is a scenario of complexity in which, for instance, you will have your phone encrypted, but your phone will use a lot of applications that will not be encrypted, and that creates points in which the information can be not secured, points in which the information can be acquired. So this scenario of widespread encryption, I think, maybe it will be more complex than that. But in the end, I think that what is important in a complex discussion like the one on encryption is that law enforcement or the government don't take decisions alone. There needs to be multi-stakeholder discussion to arrive at balanced solutions that will respect privacy and security at the first time. And decisions should not be made in a rush. What concerns me many times is that the moments in which we discuss encryption more strongly are moments in which tragic events happen, such as terrorist attacks, and the moments that there is a public commotion. And of course, people want to protect their security, and they are prone to give away more of their privacy. This is not the moment to discuss encryption. It should be an ongoing discussion. Commissions need to be put in place, and it should be a multi-stakeholder discussion so we may arrive at the best solutions possible. So that would be my introductory remarks. I'm looking forward
Thank you, Marilia, for excellent summary. Please stay with us. You reiterated the point which Phil introduced, that there is enough security, that governments have a legitimate interest to protect security, but they have enough tools. This is an interesting question. Probably I hope that some colleagues from government sector could challenge it. Is it the case? Are there some counter arguments for that point? You also brought the question of multi-stakeholder participation. Incidentally, as we know, it's quite a developed concept in internet governance, but when it comes to security, governments, including those governments who are keen on multi-stakeholder participation in other fields, are not particularly keen to have multi-stakeholder discussion, which is a pity, because this is a field where you really need balances between users, civil society, business, and governments. We have now the sort of development of the first ideas that Phil mentioned about this analog approach and the complex approach which Marilia mentioned, and then we'll move to Maciel to bring us his reflections from both frequent interaction with users and from the activities of Switch. Please, Maciel.
Okay, I'm Michael, and
I'm sorry.
As you mentioned, this is a multi-stakeholder approach, and I think the users have an important point, and they make an important decisions because they make the decision which service they use and which service they don't use. And from my view, the awareness of the privacy and encryption and data protection issues of end users, it has raised. So in my job, we often have contact with people calling us and saying, hey, I'm hacked, or most of the time we tell them, hey, you're hacked and you need to fix your computer. And 5 years ago, they were telling us, oh, why someone wants to hack me? There's nothing on my computer. And nowadays they all say, oh, who is it? Is it the NSA? Is it a hacker? Is my bank account still available? Is my money still there? So the awareness of privacy and data protection of the end user has risen in the last 5 years. And I think one of the issues is what Snowden did, that he made public how mass surveillance is conducted by different state actors, but also most of you already know someone who was a victim of cybercrime. So someone whose credit card was stolen when he was shopping online, or whose bank account was compromised, whose computer was encrypted, and you were asked for a ransom. So the users are aware. And they know that encryption is one thing they can do to improve the data protection and to help with their privacy. I think they also realize that the government is not necessarily the one who helps them with protecting their data. At least, yeah, maybe their own government, but there are a lot of other governments who don't want that they encrypt their data. The problem that most of the end users have is that technology is too complex to implement it themselves. So I'm an expert, I'm using PGP for 20 years, and it perfectly works in a closed community with all the other experts. But I can't send my mother a PGP encrypted email. She will never read it. But it was already mentioned, WhatsApp turned on encryption, end-to-end encryption in their messenger, and I think that's quite important. If the industry offers encrypted services, I think the users have a choice, at least, to use them. And it's one way the industry can have an advantage over their competitors if they offer encrypted services. And I hope that most of the users will make the choice to use encrypted services over non-encrypted services. There's one way that WhatsApp did, that's the end-to-end encryption, but there's also, let's say, for email, you have transport encryption, and in Germany, some of the big service providers like GMX, they turned on DANE TLS encryption, so that encrypts the emails while they are transferred and also encrypts the metadata, so who sends email to whom. They just turned it on, and they have, I don't know, 50 million of users that now use this encryption or the transport layer when they're sending email. And I think at one point the end users will realize, okay, which ISP offers me encryption and a little bit more security, and which service provider doesn't. For the end user, from the viewpoint of the end user, as said you in the beginning, is important. What is the threat to the end user and to the privacy and data and information you want to protect? And I see that there are three main threats for the end user nowadays that the end user realizes. The first of all is the mass surveillance that's the most present in the press in everyday life. Your government may spy on you, but also other governments spy on you when you use the internet. So email is automatically surveillance, and the NSA reads it. At least that's what the end user realizes. There's not so much he can do against that, but he can use encrypted services. The second thing is cybercrime. Most users realize, okay, I have a friend whose laptop was locked by a crypto locker, and he was asked $300, so there's something I need to do. And the third thing is that service providers themselves, they're also a threat to the privacy. So I might sign up for a free service, and even if I don't make the private information public, like on Facebook, the service provider himself might sell this data that he has from me, or he might get compromised and my private data is stolen. I think we had the discussion about encryption of services, that encryption helps against all these threats. It's not the solution that provides all the risks, but if you encrypt your email, your service provider cannot scan it for keywords and sell you better ads. If you encrypt your emails with using TLS or even PGP, or if you use services like WhatsApp that is encrypted, governments cannot. It's harder for them to surveil them. So they will still see a lot, but they will not see the content, for example. And also against cybercrime, I think encryption will help. From my perspective, cybercrime is the biggest threat from all of these, because if you look at the damage, there's no real damage from the surveillance for the average citizen, but there's a lot of damage when computers are hacked, when bank accounts are emptied, when you need to restore your PC because it was encrypted. That's really billions of dollars every year. And so I think the biggest threat is cybercrime. And encryption won't stop cybercrime, but it will make the life of the cybercriminals a little bit harder to have success against the internet user.
Thank you, Michael, especially for raising this connection between cybercrime and encryption. It's usually discussed in the context of surveillance and privacy and the freedom of political freedoms, but this is highly valuable comment. Now we will move to Richard's intervention, and I would like to ask Richard. I know that he's very flexible to start to make a bridge towards discussion. And one of the issue which was raised by Phil, and I would say repeated by all panelists, is that governments are basically having enough tools, and that access to encryption is not a solution for security problems. We got it as a sort of a statement. Could you substantiate that? And I would like also to invite our colleagues here in the room to bring some counter arguments where governments may not have sufficient tools, and when encryption is an important issue for them. Richard?
Yeah, actually I was going to take that line, so that's perfect. I'm actually going to go back to this morning. How many people were here this morning and saw the silent phone? So now put yourself in the shoes of David Cameron, just to name one of them, or the director of the NSA, to name another one. And what is going to be your reaction if you saw the silent phone presentation? Oh my God, you're giving the perfect tool to the terrorists. That's not true. Why is it not true? Because we gave him the perfect tool when we gave him the GSM phone. How many people follow military history a little bit? Okay, maybe I'm the only one. One of the significant advances in military technology in the Second World War was radio communication, because that allowed instant communication with troops on the field. Remember in Napoleon's day, they actually had to send a guy on a horse? That's why Napoleon lost Waterloo, by the way. Or smoke, or signals, but and then they started laying telegraph lines. That was important in World War I. And World War II, you got to the point where actually, you remember those old movies, the walkie-talkie? Okay, you actually had individual soldiers in a group of, say, 5 or 6 who had their own radio communications and could be ordered what to do. Now, think about how many of you actually live in Geneva? Everybody, right, I think. Remember that just recently we had unannounced violent demonstration which resulted in significant damage to the opera in the Place de Neuve. How do those people manage to evade the police, aside from the fact that the police blew it and didn't have enough police present? But even if they had, how do those people manage to evade the police? Do you know how they do that? How they organize these demonstrations? Well, they organize them on Facebook, and then they use their GSM phone as a tactical tool. So they have people all around watching where the police are, and they say, right now, this street, there's no police. Run down this street. So the problem is the telephone. It's the mobile communication. We have given military-grade communications, which were available to very few people before World War II, to everybody. And you can use that for good, which most of us do, or for evil. So the problem is not the encrypted phone, the problem is the phone. So what are we going to do, get rid of the phone? And why is the encryption not the problem? Well, because suppose I know, I'm a demonstrator, and I know that they're listening, which they don't in Switzerland, but let's suppose that I know that they're listening. What am I going to do? I'm not going to say, let's go down Rue de la Coraterie to reach the Grand Théâtre. I'm going to say, let's go down 1 to reach 5. Because I have predetermined the code with my fellow conspirators. There's only like 20 of these guys, even fewer, probably 5 or 6, and then they lead the pack. That's called a code. Okay? Does everybody know the distinction between code and encryption? We do. But basically a code is a list. It's another language. And a code, by definition, is very difficult to break. It can be broken, but not for small communications. So if you eliminate cryptography, criminals will just use code, which guess what? It's what they used to use before they had cryptography. It's well known. So the whole concept is nonsense, and then I'll come to another illustration of why it's nonsense. Terrorism is actually crime. It's crime just like any other crime from many points of view, including the fact that there are not that many terrorists. There are a very small number of people who are actually going out, blowing themselves up here and there. So how can you find them in this huge mass of people? If you make the haystack, Marcus Kummer gave me this analogy, thank you, Marcus. If you make the haystack big enough, you won't be able to find any needles. And that's what we're doing, right? We're saying the haystack now consists of 3 billion people who are connected to the internet and 6 billion people connected to the GSM network. Wow! How are we going to find the 2,000 or 3,000 terrorists out of all of those billions of people? It's just not possible. And in fact, as you, I hope you know, the people who perpetrated the crimes in Paris and in Brussels were actually all on watch lists. They just weren't watched because they don't have enough people to watch all the people on the watch list.
And they use burner phones.
And they use burner phones,
Yeah.
which are untraceable anyway. And probably they were speaking in code because, well, maybe not because they weren't that clever. But if they were clever, they were speaking in code. So does anybody think that mass surveillance could be used to prevent bank robberies? No. Obviously. But there are more bank robbers than terrorists. So why do we think that mass surveillance can be used? Why does anybody believe this nonsense coming from politicians? Well, we know the answer. People died. It's horrible. We have to do something. Yes, okay. And we don't know what to do. Okay. So let's do something that sells, no matter how ineffective it is and what a waste of money it is. I'll take another example. So those of you who are on the computer, see if you get the same result I got. Type into your favorite browser, a search engine, how many people died in Switzerland in avalanches last year? Okay, the number I got was something like 200. It may be, is that right?
40.
Yeah, 40? Okay, you have the number, 40. Okay, great. Now, how many people died from terrorist accidents in Switzerland in the past Long time. 0, okay. So if we're the Swiss government and we want to save lives, what should we do? Well, we should obviously focus on reducing the number of people who die in avalanches in the Alps. And can we do that using mass surveillance of their mobile phones? Yes! Because through geolocation, we can find out when they're going in an area that's close, because that's what happens. They don't get killed on normal, on the normal slopes. They get killed because they go in forbidden areas. But we know where the forbidden areas are. And with geolocation, we can find them. So as soon as they go in the forbidden area, we'll send a helicopter. It says, no, 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 pull back. Why don't we do that? Let's hear. So the final point I'll make is something that was hinted at, and it's in the data retention. In Switzerland, by the way, how many people here are Swiss voters?
Cantonal or federal?
It's always both. In Switzerland, it's both. You cannot be a cantonal voter without being federal. Okay, how many know that we're running referendums against the new law which installs mass surveillance in Switzerland? And we're also running we have the signatures on that one, so there will be a referendum, and we're currently correcting signatures on the lawful intercept law. The lawful intercept law does not change the data retention period. I'll only talk about this aspect of the law. It keeps it unchanged at 6 months. Nevertheless, we're still against the law because it's doing other things, but I want to speak against data retention in the first place. At first sight, it seems reasonable. Why shouldn't the operator have to hold 6 months of metadata? They don't hold the conversations, obviously. Let's just talk about telephone data. I mean, after all, this is useful because now if I kill my wife tomorrow, they can go back and find out that I was already plotting this 3 years ago, or if I hired somebody to do it, they'll maybe be able to track through my telephone calls, because I'm that stupid, who I actually hired. And that actually works sometimes. Well, that's true, and I don't have any particular objection to their keeping my metadata, except that, how do I know who else is getting the metadata? First of all, no matter how well it's encrypted, we know the NSA has got all that data, and I don't particularly care for the NSA to know who I'm calling all the time. More importantly, what about the insider attack? Snowden walked out with information about the processes, right? He only disclosed the processes that the NSA is using. He could just as well have walked out with the actual data. What could have prevented him? What could have prevented Snowden from walking out with a list of all the people that he could sell to some organization? Now, you can think of lots of those, right? He could sell all the list of Palestinian activists to the Israeli security forces, or all the list of the Israeli security forces to the Palestinian activists, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The list is endless. So I'm at risk simply because somebody inside one of those organizations could take the data and go out. And you say, well, that's unlikely. Wait a minute. It's unlikely that a normal employee will do that. But what about the sleeper? You know what the sleeper is? That's an agent that's planted there at the beginning. What prevents a member of a criminal organization like the mafia, pick whichever one you like, you know, the one in Calabria, the one in Sicily, the one in Russia, the one in Belgium, there's a mafia everywhere. What prevents somebody from that organization from getting a legitimate job as an employee, rising up to the ranks, getting all the insider administrative privileges, and then taking that data and selling the list of all the people who have enough money so that it's worthwhile to kidnap their children? So that's the risk of data retention. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard. Well, one point that we got from all this is that we shouldn't look for definitely quick solutions and quick fixes, which what Marilia mentioned and it was reported. But there is also a bit of again paradox, which we started discussing this morning with the Sion presentation, is that solutions, at least government conceptualized solutions, could be very often counterproductive. And you introduced this avalanche metaphor, which I think it's very, very useful, and set the stage for questions and discussions, both online and in situ. The floor is yours. Okay. We'll start with online.
Yes. Well, we have a comment from Vladimir Radonovich, who said that privacy can't exist without security, but also vice versa. And security is as much about state as it is, or even more about individuals. So privacy is a precondition for individual security, and individual security is a precondition for collective security. So this is contribution. And then we have another question from Romina Florencia Cabrera. Well, she started saying that civil rights and social throughout history conquests are threatened today by terrorism, and especially in the digital environment. So as we can achieve balance as an international community, that policy.
Could you repeat that, please?
Yeah, well, as we can achieve the balance as an international community, the policy facing the risks that cyber terrorism and cyber attacks can provide today.
Yeah, the question was if there is a possibility to achieve a balance between security and privacy, but it's in a way you answered it already, that it's not necessarily digital issue where you have a yes or no or a plus and minus. Therefore, it's not a question where you need to achieve a balance in a way. That was implied in your introductory statement,
Yeah.
but it's open. The question is open to all panelists. Are we looking for a win-win solution, or are we looking for zero-sum solution which involves balances?
Well, I certainly don't see it as a zero-sum solution. And, you know, it's not, if you want to prevent attacks on your networks, you need to have protections, including encryption. And if you're going to protect against criminals breaking in, you're protecting against sovereign states breaking in. There is no striking a balance. You know, if you're going to make a back door, then the back door will be exploited by bad guys. You know, I mean, look, nation states are investing heavily in the ability to attack. There was an American defense official that said something a few months ago that if this was a football game, that if cybersecurity was a football game, then the score would be 350 to 380 in the first 20 minutes of the game, because it's all offense and no defense. You know, the intel agencies of the major governments have such powerful offensive capability. The rest of the entire computer industry and the cybersecurity industry doesn't have the kind of defense that they need to have. We haven't invested enough in that yet. It's heavily lopsided, in the same way that it's lopsided in favor of cryptographers over cryptanalysts in the purely mathematical world of cryptography. In the practical world, the NSA has shifted the problem from a math problem to an engineering problem. They have 30,000 engineers, scientists, mathematicians, working full-time every day to turn it into an engineering problem. And so there is no striking a balance. You know, every time I hear that phrase, striking a balance, can we strike a balance? As soon as I hear, that's like saying, whenever you hear somebody saying, with all due respect, and then whatever it is they're going to say next is going to be, without any respect,
Yeah, I'd like to elaborate on it. Obviously, I agree, but I'd like to elaborate on a slightly different tack. Let's look back at the terrorism. It's not just the communication. They actually have to have guns, and they actually have to have explosives. Now, how many people have seen the types of explosives that were used in the attack on the airport in Brussels? Does anybody here know what was actually used? Okay, it was reported in the press. I forget the name because I try to forget those details. It's an explosive that is made from products that are easily acquired in any pharmacy.
Oh, yeah.
They're hard to mix, so don't try it because you're likely to blow your hand off. It's a tricky process to mix those components in such a way to get the explosive without it exploding while you're mixing them. But if you know how to do it, you can. So what are we going to do? We're going to ban hydrogen peroxide and whatever the other component was. I forget what it was.
Acetone, probably.
Acetone, yeah, exactly. We're gonna ban acetone and hydrogen peroxide because if you know how to mix them, you can create powerful explosives. But one of the big bombs, not Islamic terrorism, homegrown terrorism that went off in the U.S., it was that FBI building that got blown up. That was done by right-wing extremists in the U.S., anti-government people, I should say, not right-wing.
That was fertilizer and fuel oil.
That was fertilizer and diesel oil. So what are you going to do? Ban that? How many people are killed by cars? What are we going to do? Ban that? Let's strike the right balance between cars and not killing people through cars by accident. What's the right balance?
Don't sell cars.
Don't sell cars. Again, those of us who are Swiss know that we, in my opinion, have gone too far there because they've now made the speeding laws such that actually in Switzerland you can go to jail and pay a far bigger fine for speeding than for bodily injury. So if you're speeding and you don't kill anybody, you're worse off than if I beat you up.
I can't resist the Bonnie and Clyde story. I want to tell you about that. Approximately a century ago, the American bank robbers, Bonnie and Clyde, pioneered the use of cars in bank robbery. No other bank robbers before Bonnie and Clyde had ever done that. They would run into a bank, rob the bank, run out, jump in their car, and drive at high speed across multiple state lines to evade the police chasing them. They weren't allowed to chase them across state lines. And the police had never seen bank robbers do that before. This was like a century ago. And the police just didn't know what to do. They couldn't imagine bank robbers doing this. And they said, what are we going to do? And they proposed that car companies build cars with smaller fuel tanks. Clyde Barrow, the Clyde of Bonnie and Clyde, wrote a letter to Henry Ford thanking him for designing such a fine automobile and that it was essential for his work as a bank robber. In fact, some police even suggested that nobody should be allowed to purchase cars at all, even with a smaller fuel tank.
We were there already, huh?
What?
We were there as a society already in the past, you know.
Today, with the Internet of Things, we'll just say, well, let's put a disable switch on every car so that the police can turn your car off if they think it's being used for a crime.
Yeah. We can't optimize it for the police, Look, people have a tendency to think of just their own jobs, And if you're in law enforcement, you tend to think of just your job in law enforcement. So you want to optimize the whole world to make your little job easier. Well, yeah, but that's not the only mission. There's other missions like having an economically powerful economy. We got to have e-commerce. We got to have the ability to function as a society. We can't just unilaterally disarm and let all the criminals attack us because it makes it easier for the police to get in. In fact, if we did that, the police would suddenly find themselves with a much more difficult job. They would be trying to solve far more crimes. About 10 years ago, I had the occasion to go down and give a lecture in Bogota, Colombia, at some security conference. And while I was there, they asked me to meet with some members of parliament about changing the laws. You see, in Colombia at that time, 10 years ago, it was not legal to use strong cryptography. In fact, not even banks could use strong cryptography. And because of this, banks were wide open to bank robbers breaking into their networks and stealing money. And so we were having a little planning session to go and meet with the members of parliament to encourage them to pass this new law that would allow strong cryptography, at least for banks. And somebody was late to the meeting. And they came in late, and she said, "I'm sorry I'm late, but this morning my bank account was cleaned out by robbers because they broke in electronically." So here we are. We're going to go meet with the member of parliament to talk about the use. Please make it legal to use strong cryptography, and somebody was late to the meeting because they just had their bank account robbed. I mean, it was perfect timing. I would assume that sometime in the past decade they managed to improve things in Colombia.
Right. Well, I'm concerned about one aspect. We are really in agreement here. Is there any view that could contradict the mainstream of our discussion so far? Please.
Not so much a view, just a question. My name is Bryce Bashik with Bloomberg BNA. Thank you for your comments. From a policy perspective, there's questions of whether the ITU or the Human Rights Committee at the UN should handle this balance between privacy and security. What's your perspective on this? I mean, how should this be addressed at a policy or a regulatory level in the international community? Thank you.
Right. So I work with different organizations, so what I'm going to say now is not at all the position of the Internet Society, so let's be clear on that, but is the position of other groups I work in. We believe that actually there's a need for a treaty which makes it clear what we've been saying here. There is no balance. States should not interfere with the technology of encryption, full stop. And I think that could be put in the existing ITU constitution. Other people don't think so. I mean, it doesn't really matter where you put it. But so far, this is a unanimous view of civil society, by the way, that there should be no restrictions on encryption, not the treaty part. There should be no restrictions on encryption is a unanimous view of civil society. It's been presented at various multi-stakeholder meetings, but as Jovan hinted, those states which are most open to inputs from civil society usually on this particular issue are particularly deaf to inputs from civil society. So all those calls have not yet been taken up by any individual government. It has, on the other hand, been taken up by the Interparliamentary Union, which is the organization of all the world's parliaments. And it's emerging now, I think, also in Council of Europe. So I think there's some progress that our message is being heard, that there actually is not a trade-off. We need the right tools to encrypt, and inevitably it's going to make it more difficult for the police to get the information that way, so the police will have to get the information in other ways, like they used to do before you had the internet. I mean, you know, they caught burglars back in the days of Sherlock Holmes. Okay, he used telegraph, but they didn't break into the telegraph to do that, and they caught them before there was telegraphy, and they caught them before there was a telephone, and they caught them after there was a telephone. So
these crimes leave footprints in the real world.
exactly, everything leaves something in footprint in the real world. It's maybe harder, and maybe sometimes you won't catch some people, but on the other hand, that's just how it goes, because we need these tools to be safe. What are we going to do? Not have locks on the door so that the police can get in earlier in case you're about to murder your wife or your children? I mean, that's silly.
Okay, we'll have Marilia. Could you provide us with your view about this, the answer to this question, where it should be addressed, this question of privacy, encryption, and security?
Thanks, Jovan. Before that, I just would like to come back to Richard's analogy on the avalanche, because I think it's a very interesting one. I think it's valid, but I think that there is a difference between deaths that happen due to behaviors that are reckless, based on individual decisions to be reckless, and in terms of perception, I mean, and the perception that we have in terms of deaths that happen because there was a political plan behind them and a political action by organized groups behind them. So to me, it's like, just think about connected cars. We know for a fact that if we introduce connected cars in some years from now, the number of deaths will be less. But are we as a society prepared to face deaths that happen because of technology that we introduced? I think that as human beings, we are much more prone to accept deaths that happen because of human behavior, even if these deaths are more in number than deaths that happen because we introduced connected cars. Autonomous cars will be introduced only when they are almost 100% proof that they will not fail. That's not logical. That's how perception works. So I think that even though what Richard said is completely accurate, I think that what law enforcement does, especially when it comes to terrorism, is to play with the sensation of fear that people have. The problem is that with the sensation of fear, I think that they have gained more and more space to introduce, or at least to push for, policies that have no proved efficacy whatsoever. We have no proof that retaining data for 5-6 years will help police to reduce the number of crimes. We have no proof that forbidding encryption will make law enforcement more prone to reduce the number of terrorist attacks or prevent them or foresee them. So without these proofs, there is no way that we can develop public policy, especially when this public policy is going to curtail human rights. So there shouldn't be an option for us. And this is certainly not proportional in terms of society to put everyone in danger and just to catch just the fear. But in terms of spaces where to discuss this, I think that this is a challenge now internationally, because the discussions when it comes to security, they are so fragmented in different spaces. What I know is that there will be probably an interesting space to discuss the interplay between internet governance and security. There's a commission that has been announced that is going to be like the legacy of the continuation of the built commission on internet governance that is going to be focused on security issues, especially on peace and security and surveillance issues. And maybe this is a space because it will be multi-stakeholder and it will have a very strong academic arm attached to it. I think that maybe this would be an important space for us to discuss these things in a more continuous manner, not on a case-by-case basis, but have some space to do it. But of course, it's important to take this to forums that are spaces for awareness raising and capacity building, such as the IGF. It is important to take this to ITU on the matters that are related to ITU's remit, but it's also important to have spaces in which we all coalesce.
Thank you, Marilia. We are here. We have comments from Stephanie, please.
You work with that. Okay. Hi, Stephanie Frey. I'm working for the Swiss government, actually for Melanie, which is the Reporting and Analysis Center for Information Assurance. The gentleman from Switch surely knows the outfit. I'm the coordinator for the National Cybersecurity Strategy. And I have to vehemently object that our intelligence law is a mass surveillance. It's my obligation as a government employee to make that really clear. What we are doing there is to empower the government, the intelligence service, to do their job, the basic job that every intelligence service has to do, but it has nothing to do with mass surveillance. Your example with Snowden walking out of a building with data, that actually happened in Switzerland. It's a very good example that you can have the best encryption, but if somebody walks out with your data, the data's gone. So what's really important at this point from a government point of view, also how we do our strategy, how we set it up, it has to be comprehensive, it has to include all aspects, technical and non-technical. There has to be strong information exchange between law enforcement, between government, and between organizations. So unless you have that interplay going, the best encryption won't help. So I think we should really not only impugn governments for doing very often just their job. They might also abuse it at times. Very often they just do their job as well. So I think that's an important point I wanted to make.
Thank you, Stephanie. It brings one point which was underlying in this discussion, and all social contract theories are more or less based on the idea that we as citizens pass to the government certain rights to protect our security, from the Thomas Hobbes and Leviathan and the other social contract theories. Therefore, that question of the legitimate function of government to protect security is as relevant as it was today. And I think you introduce a highly important distinction between mass surveillance and targeted surveillance or for intelligence purposes. I think that there is no concern that targeted surveillance as a tool which law enforcement agencies are using is not questionable. Richard, you had some point.
Yeah, well, first to come back to your comment, of course you have to defend the government position, that's normal. I would invite everybody who is Swiss to read the law. It's the Nachrichtendienstgesetz, yeah, and in Swiss, le renseignement. I forget the Italian. You can find it on the Confederation's website fairly easily, and you can decide for yourself whether it institutes mass surveillance or not. I agree that some people say it doesn't, even within my circles, but I think that most people would feel that it is mass surveillance, depending on how you define mass surveillance. Yeah, the point is, I don't know of anybody who objects to targeted surveillance of known criminals. Well, I actually do know some people who object, but they don't object to crime as such. Those are the extreme libertarians. But I think anybody who accepts that crime should be repressed, which is essentially everybody, would accept that you have to use all means you can to catch criminals and prevent them from committing further crimes, including targeted surveillance. So let's drill down a little bit into the other law that we're running, or hope to run a referendum against. We're collecting the signatures. The law on lawful surveillance in Switzerland. I mentioned the data retention, which has not changed. One of the new features of this law is it allows the government to install Trojans called governmentware.
This is what was introduced in France.
This is what's introduced in France, and it's under strict control. So it's under control of the same court system that orders arrests or imprisonment or regular surveillance, breaking into your home and so on. So it's under strict judicial control only for serious crimes. So on its face, what's the problem? You know, I mean, after all, they can come into your house and put a microphone in under those circumstances to monitor your conversations, secretly, obviously. So why shouldn't they be able to do something on your smartphone that's equivalent? Well, the reason is that on the smartphone, on the computer, you could still do it physically, fairly easily, in fact. On the smartphone, it's getting very hard to do physically, so you have to do it through software. Well, what's wrong with that? Well, that means you have to acquire the software to do that, because Switzerland cannot actually produce software to do that. Worse, you have to acquire the zero-day exploit. Everybody knows what is the zero-day exploit? Okay, you have to acquire the information about the flaw in the telephone that allows you to install the malware. And so now the government is creating a market for malware and for zero-day exploits. And the people who produce that stuff, some of them will only sell it to governments, but some of them will sell it to everybody. And they'll sell it to our prototypical, you pick the country, Russia, Ukraine, you know, Kenya, Uganda, whatever, guy who's going to break into your bank account and steal your money. And so we're creating actually less security by attempting to create security. So in principle, there's nothing wrong with the government. I don't have anything against the government installing malware in the telephone of a suspected criminal on the order of a judge. Some people have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with that. But I have a problem with the fact that unwittingly we're going to create a market for stuff that's going to leak. Now, even the company that's ethical and sells it only to the government, again, what prevents an employee of that company from walking out of the company with that bit of malware and selling it on the black market?
I know a guy who makes a living making zero-day attacks.
Of course,
And,
lots of people do.
And he's paid with grocery bags full of cash.
Or bitcoins.
Yeah.
You know, either way, you know. So what are we going to do? We're going to eliminate cash because cash is used to commit crimes?
Richard, this reasoning is interesting and highly relevant and practical, but there is some sort of a possible logical inconsistency. We are always judging about, in this concrete case of Trojan horse, on the imperfection of the possible action of the government, which could be the case, and we can find many cases. But there is also the question if, in principle, government, given the perfect conditions, could have a right to access data in targeted surveillance, let's say San Bernardino case, or similar cases.
Yeah.
This is, I know that it could be abstract discussion. The governments are the governments. They have all flaws in their activities and weaknesses, and that it could be misused. But there is a really principal question: if government should have access, if there is a legitimate reason to access specific device and to get information about specific terrorist attack. I think we as a society will have to discuss and to address this issue.
So forget terrorist attack, case of
case of
crime. Well, I'm very clear on that, yes. I think most people in civil society would feel yes, provided that it's necessary and proportionate and there's adequate judicial supervision. Some extremists say no, you know, extreme libertarians, but I think most people would accept that. Let me come back to something you said. What are the arguments for? Because we're being too much against. So the arguments for example, you can read it in the recent very good report done by the House of Lords on the debate in the UK. No, maybe it's not the House of Lords. Anyway, there's a very good summary done by the UK Parliament because they're passing a new surveillance law. It was the intelligence services that presented their argument. So their argument is basically what we've heard before. Look, there's more and more criminals out there. May or may not be true. There are more terrorists out there, that's certainly clear. There are more politically motivated criminals, so if you call them terrorists, there are more terrorists out there. The effects of their acts can be horrendous, because actually, you know, Brussels was pretty bad, but they could get worse. There are many ways that these people could have done things which are far worse than what they actually did, and this is a threat to the population. We have to counter it by all possible means. So far, we all agree. One of the possible means is to get more information. Okay, that's where I disagree because I'm a statistician, but okay, they're saying, trust us, those means are effective, and then they give these famous statistics, right? We have actually prevented X, where X is 1, 2, you know, depending on the country, 50 potential terrorist acts thanks to this kind of surveillance. Okay, the details are always classified, so you never really quite know whether they're fudging or not. The NSA, interestingly enough, the statistics in the US don't claim a very high success rate. Depending on the congressional report you look at, it's between 0 and 4. UK is claiming higher success rate. So that's the argument for. The argument for is, well, no, actually, when you say that these techniques don't work, you're incorrect. We who are actually in the intelligence service working this on a day-to-day basis have actually succeeded in preventing attacks through this. So that's the basic argument for that. In practice, it works. Now, again, I don't believe them, to be honest. But you said give the arguments for. Those are the arguments for that. In actual practice, it's been helpful.
Thank you.
I make crypto products that are used by the very same intel agencies. A couple years ago, I got an award, the Cybersecurity Hall of Fame, and it was organized by the sort of intel community, and I got this award presented to me by Michael Rogers, who is the sitting director of the NSA. This is a very strange, surreal experience for me to get an award from, this award. Now, at the same time, Paul Kocher, who invented SSL, got an award the same night, and a couple of other people that did some very important cybersecurity work. And during the award ceremony, or after when we were standing around and I was, there's an awards banquet, a guy came up to me and he said that he works at the human side of things. That's human intelligence, not signals intelligence, but, and I said, you mean like CIA? And he said, no, Defense Intelligence Agency. The U.S. has has quite a few intelligence agencies, various specialties. And so he said that he wanted to thank me because he has a number of friends who are alive today because of PGP. Mm-hmm. And to me, it was more significant to hear him say that to me than it was receiving the Cybersecurity Hall of Fame award. That will stand out in my memory more than the actual Cybersecurity Hall of Fame. Right now, all of the things that I've made, PGP, silent phone, you guys saw silent phone earlier today. These are used by intel agencies, by the military, by the special operations forces. Silent phone is used by Navy SEALs. They use them not just to call their families at home, they use them on operations when they go out and try to kill the very same terrorist that we're having our debates about. And they will not use it if there's a back door. They won't. They just won't. Because they know what it means to have a back door. It means that bad guys are going to get in and exploit the back door. That's how it is about back doors. It's intrinsic to back doors. If you build a back door, just like Google learned about China, it will be used by someone other than who you designed the back door to be used by. So I'm very proud that Navy SEALs are using my encryption software to kill Islamic extremists. I mean, we could have a debate about foreign and military policy, about whether the U.S. intervenes too much and all that stuff, but I think Islamic extremism is a really big problem. We need to be doing something about it, but I don't think optimizing all of society for surveillance is a good solution to the problem. I think that it's a multidimensional problem. We have to work on it in multiple dimensions. Sometimes that involves military components, but sometimes it involves things like trying to integrate immigrants into the community so that they become more part of civil society and participate more in mixing their cultures with the rest of society so that they have a better relationship with the rest of society and are less likely to go put bombs in airports. I mean, it's a more complex problem. It is a very severe, significant problem, but the solution is not to crack down on more and more surveillance.
Thank you, Phil, for just broadening our discussion and that and coming to the point that both Richard and you mentioned that Usually governments go for the quick solution, especially in the aftermath of the emotionally charged incidents or attacks like Brussels or Paris or London.
Yeah.
And usually these type of solutions are not good solutions. They are taken in the rush. They have the shortcuts. They don't have careful consideration. They are not evidence-based, if I can use that phrase, policy making. And evidence-based policy making takes time. And what Marilia mentioned is maybe that new Commission on Security, discussions which are going within the UNGGE group, discussion in various fora like Internet Governance Forum. Sometimes we are concerned that they take a lot of time, but good policy requires first bringing everybody on the board, socialization of the ideas, discussion. People can internalize these ideas and take that as you say, the solutions are very complex. And probably that's one of the underlying messages, that shortcuts could be very counterproductive and to some extent dangerous. It will take a time, it will take quite a bit of wisdom, mix of wisdom, empathy, that we as a society need. And I think few examples that you mentioned from this award ceremony are really telling that everything got in a way confused on the first glance, but when you think carefully, it makes a lot of sense. Well, with this comment from Phil, I would like to conclude this session, and would like to invite you both online and here in the room to thank with applause to our panelists for excellent reflections and insights. Well, with this, I would like to close our today's conference, which was in a way experimental, because we tried to bring two communities, policy community and technical community. Based on the comments that we have heard, we plan to continue with this type of events and better communication. Today we had very, very easy, I would say, and smooth communication between technical and policy communities. And that should continue, and we'll have more occasions for similar meetings. Please let us know your ideas and suggestions, what issues and from what angle should be tackled. Thank you once more.